Today's class is on making silicone molds. In my last class on YouTube I showed everybody how to use a press-on mold. This is slightly different. It's a two-part, but it's a runny liquid, the silicone, until it sets. So there is a different way to do that mold and different uses. So I'll go through those. So what I find good with molding, if you're a cake decorator that uses a lot of figurines in your work, sometimes it's more cost effective and easier for you to first of all sculpt something like this in a clay, and that way when you go to do a figurine you can just press it into a mold and add it to a head rather than sculpt the whole face. So you could just work on doing this sort of thing. I have about 100 of these sort of faces, and I've used a lot. I've done a lot of work with clay, so I have a lot of those. So my original sculpt I do in the Sculpey clay, and that's an oven baked clay. So that way you can mold that and have that forever to use again. That one. With silicone molding, the method I'll show you today, every part that you mold must have a flat back, as flat as possible. So when you are sculpting, I do recommend to sculpt onto a tile. That way when you finish your sculpture, it can just go straight into the oven, and then it comes out with a nice flat back, ready for molding. So what we need today, of course, is a tile. We need our clay face. This will be around the mold, around the face, sorry, and that's how we will pour our silicone in. These are a flexi chopping mat. They're about $3 from the cheap shop, and I find them the absolute best for doing this sort of thing. Some people use cardboard boxes, like to use cardboard. I think everything comes out nicer with waterproof. Today I'm using a pinky seal 2-part silicone here. It's not, doesn't say it's food safe on here at all. I normally use this one for clay, so it's up to you guys to source something that's safe to use. Hot glue gun and hot glue sticks, at least 2 cups, and a stirring stick, a jug. Okay, and we'll get started. So we've got our little face here ready to mold. So the first step that we do is stick the face onto the tile. I'll use hot glue for that, and I'll show you with this face. It's important to have, with anything you're molding this way, unless you're doing a sort of a 2-part mold, which is a bit more complex, you will need a flat surface. If you have any sort of round surface, you'll get what's called an undercut, where the silicone will go underneath, and it's just a pain to have to go and trim the edges. You can still use them, but I like to have that nice flat surface. It just makes it a lot easier if you're just doing a face. So what I do with this is get my hot glue gun, and I have some baby wipes already. So it needs to be nice and secure onto the tile. So I'll just stick him down so he's nice and flat. And I just do a bit of a wipe around in case there's any glue. And if you don't have a base that's completely flat, you can actually go in with a bit of clay and just do the clay underneath as well. But sometimes if you use the hot glue, I find you can actually just mold that in too, and that's a lot easier than getting clay out. Okay, so now he'll be nice and secure. So I go and get my cutting board that I had, and I place it around like that, and I get myself about the size that I want for this mold. And that's the thing about these flexible cutting boards. You can mold to any shape you want, and it actually saves in silicone because you're getting the exact shape. So I've decided that that's about the right size, so I'll just let it go. So what I do now is I'll just put a touch of glue over the top, and glue it so it's nice and the two top edges are nice and flush, and just wait for that to set. And I can take this off, and I'll want to get my glue up in this edge. I don't want a loose edge there so the silicone can go down it. So I get my hot glue. Oops, that's come apart. It's no big deal. And just give that a good squash. It doesn't matter if this end's kind of loose. It's more about having that inner edge. I might just stabilise that with a little bit more glue because we will be bending it a fair bit. We just wait for that to set. So the next step with this mould now is we're going to attach the plastic to the tile so we can pour the silicone. So the way I do this, I want my base to be sitting flush with the tile, so when I pour the silicone, nothing will come out the bottom. So I've got a nice oval shape there with my head inside. So what I'll do now is I'll hold it to the shape that I want it. Make sure you give yourself a bit of room around the piece, otherwise you end up with a mould that has very thin edges and it can be a bit of a pain when you're pressing them in. So I get my hot glue gun and I'm going to do one layer around the base. So I basically point my gun right in between the cutting mat and the tile while I hold this in place. I do it all the way around. Always make sure you have a lot of backup glue for this because it does use a lot. With this method, you can use clay around the bottom. A lot of people use sort of a oil-based clay, an SP clay. I just find the hot glue is easier. It's clear, it works. It's really easy to use, and I have it right here, so I just wait for that one to set. Okay, so now this one's set. I'll go back around, and what I want to do is sort of try and go on top of this line that we've already done, just to make sure that there's no gaps or anything left. So I'll just go around and do that. Just enough glue. So we'll just let this set now. You can see it's nice and thick around the edges. A little face in there. He's got enough room around him to pour the silicone. So the next part of this, I want to determine how much silicone that I need to go in here. I could guess, and that would be okay. It's never a drama if you underestimate how much you need, because silicone sticks to silicone, so you can always just mix up another batch and put it on, but I mean, if you use too much, that's a waste. It's a really expensive moulding material. So my method to do this, I'll just pour water on top of this one and then just pour it back in a jug and see how many mils that I have. I want to make sure that I've got a fair bit of room between his nose and the bottom of the mould. So I have 150 mils that I have to mix up with my silicone. Now we get to the part on mixing the silicone. So we determined that we needed 150 mils, so I like to go about 20 more. That just sort of covers what might be left on the sides of the bowl and the cup that I use. So I just got a measuring jug, just a disposable spoon, or you can use disposable sticks, an extra cup, and I'll show you why in a second. And we've got our mould ready there to be poured. So with the silicone, I go with part A. So I want 85 mils. Mils of part A, and part B I'll do the same. And then we'll get to mixing. I just use a spoon to start mixing the silicone in. We've got a 20-minute drying time, so there's no real hurry, and as I'm mixing, I'm trying not to introduce too much air into the mixture. Now, even though that looks fairly mixed to me, what I'll do now is pour it into another cup. And then I can see here that a lot of part A, a lot of streaks of the part A, which is the white part, are still sitting on the bottom of the jug. So this is just a way to make sure that you're evenly mixing. So I'll give it another mix in there. Okay, I've got my mould. So with the silicone, it can get a few air bubbles in there, and well, it can affect your piece. If you get an air bubble, I have a mould that has an air bubble right on the mouth. So every time I pour it, I have to get rid of that. So it's just sort of waste time. So with the pouring, to try and thin out those air bubbles that have formed in there, you hold the cup up quite high. You can get special machines that take air out for you, but I would only buy one of those if I was dedicated to sort of making moulds for a job. So what we do, we just pour the silicone and just go straight on the top of the piece. And as I lift it high, I get such a thin line there that all the bubbles come out of it. And that's it. That will be ready to demold in about 20 minutes time. And that's it. That's how easy it is. And by the look of it there, I only have a couple of air bubbles on the base, so it should not be affected. So what I want to do is lift it off the tile. So I'll grab a knife. Comes up nice and easy. I'll turn that around and I'll just pull that off. Just be rough, you can't hurt silicone. Okay, so what I'll do is just pull this one off. So what we ended up here was what I call the undercut. So I won't go in and cut that yet. So I'll just show you. That's it. Demold and perfect. So what I'll do is just get a pair of nail scissors, go around and just cut the edges, and all done. I'll come back and show you how I use that. So I'll put fondant here. What I'm going to do is just add a bit of my CMC to it, because when I'm painting faces I like them to be sort of nice and sturdy. With the mould, it's got quite a long nose, so what I want to make sure I do is get all the icing down into there. So I'll use just a bit of corn flour, make sure it's all through there. This stuff can't hurt because you can just brush it off in the end anyway. So when I roll up my icing, what I want to do is try and get it into a point, like sort of a big teardrop here, and I'll make sure there's no cracks or anything in there, or you're going to end up with one in the nose. And then I just push that straight down in there into the nose, and then I just press it in. You have to press it in nice and firm so you get all the details on your face. So with moulds too, you can create a plaster of Paris casing, especially if they're a thin mould, because when you press them in, it can obviously go out. This is a pretty big mould, so I don't need to, but with some of the other moulds I've had, you can do plaster around them and they work really, really well. It just gives it sort of a shell. So what I'll do, I'll put that in the freezer for about 5 minutes and then take it out. Okay, so I've had this mould in the freezer for about 5 minutes. It doesn't take very long. So now I'm just going to pull it out. It should be nice and sort of firm, but you still need to be careful. Just be careful because this one has a long nose, so I don't want to sort of break it off. And that's it. Beautiful. I can just get a knife and sort of trim around there. This actual mould had a tiny air bubble in the mouth. I'll just remove that. Here we have a beautiful moulded face. In my next tutorial I'm going to show everybody how to paint up that face, just using mainly dust.